My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. In 3, 2, 1, and we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a graduate of the Military Academy at WestPoint and a member of such units as the 82nd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, and the White House with the Presidential Contingency Programs Office. This guest even did a little bit of clandestine work for an unnamed agency. But that's not all this guest did. He also ran 9 100-mile and 7 50-mile ultramarathons. And when he couldn't run, he raced an ultra-endurance mountain bike from Canada all the way to Mexico. After receiving a third torn meniscus injury, 52 injections on his knee, and a heavy dose of nightmares, this guest wondered if a small machine called an NX Pro, which was used in his rehabilitation, could cause a passive stress reduction and give stressed out operators and first responders a performance reboot. Fast forward through the last 2 years, 250 people, 2 of the 3 Tier 1 units, a few police departments, SWAT teams, and EMS, and he's been able to increase 20% increase in speed and accuracy of shooting in only about 45 minutes of training with my guest. I would like to introduce you to the man who is leveling the playing field for accuracy, precision, and speed on target. Please welcome Vance McMurray. What's going on, man?
DJ, you're amazing.
Well,
that
thanks.
That was like incredible.
Oh, thank you very much. To start it all off, we always talk about the youth. Now, you sent me some stuff about when you were a kid. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because there was something that was kind of confusing to me when I was reading and kind of going over your stuff. So you lived with your mom all the way up until high school, and then you were going to move in with your dad for the 4 years of high school. Now, that only lasted for 2 years. So
2 years,
was he around up until high school? Was it a new relationship? I mean, what made it go only 2 years instead of the 4 years?
Yeah, no, I mean, he, for the most of my youth, right? I mean, he still lived in Corpus. His family was down there. He had a bunch of real estate and stuff down there. Like if you're listening and you're a longtime Corpus Christian or whatever, like the original Whataburger in Corpus was owned by my dad. And so I had many meals there growing up. And so I didn't, I spent time with him in the summer type of thing, just because of the distance. You couldn't do like the regular visitation and that type of thing. But, I just going into high school, I was like, I never spent much time with my dad. And I came up with the idea of like, hey, I just thought it'd be cool to live my last 4 years at home with my dad. And then, dropping a 15-year-old teenager at the time into his life here in Austin probably was not the wisest thing. And me going from, I was living in where was we? Were we in Kilgore then? No, we hadn't moved to Kilgore. I was in Dallas then. But went into a massive high school, L.C. Anderson High School here, which at the time had like 4,000 kids in there. And so I had a lot of friends that were juniors and seniors, and the straw that probably broke the camel's back was I think it was the last day of my freshman year, or no, it was the last day of my sophomore year. A bunch of my friends were seniors, right? And they had just graduated. And so I went to Lake Austin with a bunch of them on that last day and came home in my swimsuit. And that is all. No shirt, no shoes, no keys, no wallet, no nothing. And it was a tough night. And so tried to make it work out, for a little bit longer. And then over that summer, decided to like bounce. And of course, my mom pounced into the rescue and Finished out high school in Kilgore, Texas.
Were you in trouble other than at that point? Were you in trouble ever really as a kid?
No, I was a good kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just a bad, looking back on it, being 53 now and
The wisdom that we have.
oh yeah. And, trying, my dad and I haven't talked about it because we're close now. I mean, we text several times a week now because he lives up in Georgetown. And we haven't ever like really talked about that moment in time. And me looking back on it, because I've got a 28-year-old son and a 25-year-old daughter who will be 26 at the end of this month, and then a 10-year-old daughter, right? So I've got this multi-generational parenting thing going on. And so, yeah, I mean, I've realized the errors of my ways with my first go round with my first two kids, and I've adjusted a lot of things and adjusted, my whole life around my 10-year-old. And so I, looking back on this, like I would have reacted way differently than I did that day.
Absolutely. And speaking about the childhood, you had said that you wanted to go to Annapolis. So, I mean, you had it set up that you wanted to go to a service school. Now, was it a service family, or you just saw the movie and decided, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, I was the first, I was the first one to join the service, right? My son has decided to carry on, I guess, be the next one in that tradition, because he's in the 82nd right now. But no, I was the first one. And it was all about wanting to fly, right? And that there's a whole process there in applying to the service academy. The first time, right out of high school, at the time, I started doing triathlons, right? Because I was trying to get ready for the military. And triathlons in 86 were like, not all the rage, but it was one of these things that you can look out there and people are like, oh, that's really hard. And so that's just kind of like the way I think about stuff, is like, oh, that looks like something I can do. And so I remember, because I was living in Kilgore, Texas at the time. And so to do my physical, to kind of complete or be part of my packet to even apply to get my nomination, I had to go to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana. And so I got to like out process with a flight surgeon that day. And he was like, man, for 17 years old, you're as like super fit, but I hope you didn't want to fly. And I was like, oh, really? Why is that? And he goes, well, you're as blind as a bat. So I was like, what do you mean? And so, I found out then that, I didn't have a good vision and got glasses and contacts and stuff. And then when, I didn't get a nomination to the Service Academy out of high school, ended up going to New Mexico Military Institute for a year. And so the way I'd stumbled into that one was my mom was working for, I think in my note to you, I said Roger Staubach. She was working for a guy named Ralph Neely, who was one of the offensive linemen for Staubach and ran one of Staubach's companies at the time. And so Staubach found out he knew I was trying to go to Annapolis, right? Because he's an Annapolis grad and stuff. And he was like, oh, just go to NEMI. And so I figured out what NEMI was and applied there and spent a year there. But that's really that year of my life out in Roswell, New Mexico, getting the crap beat out of me in this like little podunk military junior college, which like made plebe year at WestPoint look like, I don't even know how to describe it, like summer camp. And
I guess that would be a good question then when you talk about that. So Annapolis is on your list. You want to go there. You want to be an aviator. First, you're told you can't be an aviator. You're blind as a bat.
Yeah.
Then you're told you're the number 2 guy and he only has one slot that he can pick for someone to go to the academy. Mm-hmm. Then someone comes in and says, we'll go here and do this kind of as a placeholder until you can figure out how to get into one of the military academies. So you go and you do that. And I think it helped out reading through the stuff and doing my research on you. I think that really did help with you going there. I think it put you in a different state than the other guys that were there.
It totally did,
But to see from the military right off the bat, rejection after rejection, or you got to do this, you got to do this. Did it ever sway your opinion where you're like, screw this, it's too much to do? Or was it, I'm going to keep going until I hit that end goal?
Yeah, no, it never swayed my opinion. I mean, because by that time um, I knew the value of a service academy education. And at the being I kind of started that whole process 16 years old, 17 years old, and so in Texas, really I should say in North Texas, like around if you kind of just cut the whole state, probably like Waco North, there's kind of the West or the North Texas like WestPoint Society group, and there was this Army colonel there that just kind of he ran it like he was a brigade commander, right? But just in a caring leadership kind of way, and that was kind of for me when once I got nominated to West Point and got introduced to that group before I even like went to the academy. It just kind of underscored how amazing incredible Army officers really are. Because and I'd met like I should look up this guy's name because I haven't really thought about it until then. But if you I never met a Navy officer that was like any of the Army officers and really, non-commissioned officers that I was exposed to that year I was at New Mexico Military Institute. I mean, it's none of them were as impressive. None of them cared for me the way that the Army guys did. And so that just, and then when Congressman only had a nomination to West Point that second year that I reapplied, it was done deal then. Because you don't get to choose the service academy that you want to go to, right? You have to kind of take, unless you're able to get, I think, some like presidential or vice presidential or some super high level nomination, you really can't pick.
Which is a rare thing.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I want to kind of set the stage and ask you, because I think that it helped you. But the first question, and it's kind of a short one, is do you think that being in JROTC or excuse me, ROTC and doing the stuff that you did, do you think it hurt you right off the bat at West Point? I think it helped later on, but I think it might have hurt you right off the bat.
Why do you say that?
So when you got there, you could do the orienteering. You said that shoot, move, communicate. You had all that. But the academics were a lot harder than you thought. So being at a community college and then going and seeing the level of education that's going on at West Point, I would grant to say that they're way different from each other. Not to say that the community college is any worse, but I think that it would be more focused on at West Point. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, and Navy was a junior college, not really a community college. I mean, I guess it's the same thing, right? But I would attribute that more to the poor high schools that I had in Kilgore, Texas. Right?
Okay.
I mean, I didn't have to like study. I didn't study in high school. I didn't have to like work hard before I graduated with like a 3.75 out of high school and rarely studied. And then I get to West Point and it's hard as fuck. And so, I had to learn how to learn, which took me 2.5 years at West Point to like really figure out.
Well, let's talk about that, because what you had sent me was that you failed your first 3 math classes.
Yeah.
And then every summer of West Point, you were in summer school.
Yep.
So now we'll go back to that same question. Does this ever disillusion you? Because you're like, shit, I'm going all year and I'm going in the summertime. Does it ever, are you thinking maybe I made a bad decision?
Yeah. I mean, it was really probably the first time I just figured, out of, so let's say 900 people in my class, right? Okay. I think we graduated like 915. So first year, there's still a little over 1,000, but there's like under 100 of us that go to summer school. It's not that many. Okay. So I'm in a very select group of people, right?
Well, I would say for all 3 summers, you're in a very select group.
I am. There's like 10 of us. So, in the end of my it was my freshman year, my plebe year, our TAC officer was Captain Don Bridges. So, Ranger Regiment guy, Ranger Regiment combat squirrel. I think he was enlisted. He had to have been enlisted to have. No, he could have gotten in Grenada as. No, he'd have to have been enlisted to have a combat scroll in '88 as an officer, because he would. I mean, he had probably only been. I can't remember when Grenada was. It was in the '70s, though, wasn't it? Yeah, '83.
Okay.
So he could have. Yeah, he could have. He was an officer, I guess. He was in regiment when they went to Grenada. Yeah, Rangers lead the way. Parachute yourself, 1983. And so he was our attack officer, and each company at WestPoint has like a regular Army officer that kind of like supervises everything, and the cadet leadership kind of sort of runs it. And Don Bridges, God love him. I remember it was the end of freshman year, end of plebe year, and I think he even told me a couple times, because he really kind of took me under his wing at the end of that year, because he knew I was working hard. Like, he knew I was not like blowing off and not doing the work. He knew I was doing the work, and I was doing amazingly well at all the military and physical stuff. And he was like, I kind of see me and you. And he's like, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to keep you here, because you're the kind of person that the Army needs as an officer. And so he was my TAC officer for the next year too. And so I spent a ton of time with Don, and he'd take me out hunting, and we go out bow hunting out in the hills around WestPoint and stuff. And he taught me how to bow hunt and that kind of thing. And so he's really the one, again, that showed belief in me when nobody else could or would. That got me through, because after that year, I'd do whatever I had to do, man. I mean, I went days without sleep just to do the work, because it was so much.
Right.
Type of thing.
What was it, only math, or were you having trouble in any of the other subjects too?
Anything that related high level math, I struggled with. So, because they drop you into single variable calculus first year. And so second year's multivariable, third year's differential equations, or maybe it's stats, and then Diff-EQ. I passed Diff-EQ the first time. That was my senior year, because I wanted to graduate with my class, right? I didn't want to have to like go to summer school again, my 4th summer.
Right.
And so I pummeled myself my senior year to pass Diff-EQ with a C.
Well, and you did it. So you get commissioned 91. You're commissioned as a
92.
second 92. You're commissioned as a second lieutenant. Airborne Ranger School right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
Any difference to you in going from a service academy into actual now military schools?
No, I mean, Airborne school was Airborne school, right? I mean, the difference is, I think my son had a similar experience, right? You get to stay up the hill from Airborne school and the BOQs and stuff when everybody else is down in the barracks or whatever. And then Ranger school, I just kind of took the mentality of like, rank doesn't mean anything, right? Because you don't use rank or anything like that. I'm kind of surprised that they even like allowed you to like come in with rank, on your uniform, because it doesn't mean anything. And that's the approach I took. And I've always, in most things, like I want to earn my way, and I wanted to earn people's respect. And so I just put my head down and did the work, and, brought guys along that needed to be brought along, and, led when I needed to lead and followed when I needed to follow, type of stuff.
And so with all that, with the military schools, with WestPoint out of the way, you're kind of set on your career, and you go to the 82nd kind of in heyday time is how you
It was amazing.
Say it. So let's talk about it. You get to the 82nd, and even your first day that you're at the 82nd.
Oh yeah, dude. It was. I remember. It was. I remember what time it was. Had to be like middle of the day, lunchtime, or just before lunch. Walked into my first commander's office, and he was like, I mean, I don't even think he said like introduce himself. He's like, hey, what are you doing tonight? I was like, well, nothing, sir. He goes, what? You want to go on a jump? I was like, oh yes, sir. So yeah, put me on manifest. I mean, it was like 2 or 3 hours later, we were doing pre-jump, and I was headed on my way down to green ramp, and I literally had no idea what I had gotten myself into, because I think at Airborne school we maybe had two C-130s, worth of jumps, and Ranger school was not much more than that, if that. If we didn't, maybe we just had one plane. I don't even remember, but yeah, I mean, I remember coming out of the plane at night out of a C-141 over Sicily drop zone, and like the planes just kept on coming my whole way down to the ground. And then I saw all these like lights on the drop zone. I don't, did you ever like,
I didn't go to jump school.
you didn't go to jump school? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no idea about like heavy drops and a mass
Nope.
attack. Yeah.
I was air assault, and I had my scuba bubble. That was it.
Nice. So, if you can imagine, so you're dropping an entire brigade out of airplanes, right? All their equipment too. So every heavy drop platform has got like this magical color combination of chem lights on it on the drop zone that you're looking down and you're like, what are all these lights down here? Right. And I'd never seen anything like that. And as I got closer to the ground, I could see, I was like, man, that's a deuce and a half. Man, that's a Humvee. That's a howitzer over there. It was a lot of stuff. And yeah. And then, my commander was like, the assembly point is this lone pine tree on the north end of Sicily. And I'm like, okay, sounds good, sir. And it's kind of my mentality. I'm like, all right, I'll figure it out when I get there. And I remember I did my PLF, and I'm laying there on the ground, pop the riser, and start getting my chute up, and I get it in the parachute bag, and I start running up the drop zone. And again, this is my first day at Fort Bragg, and I'm looking, it's still night, but you can see the shape of a pine tree. And I'm like, man, there's a shit ton of pine trees around here. I hope I can find this one. So I just kept running, and I happened to be at the middle of a stick. So I was halfway down Sicily, which is like this massive drop zone. And I run up there, and sure enough, just in the, the barely nighttime light that I could see, there was this lone pine tree that was there. And there he was. He was like, good job, McMurray. Glad you made it. So.
Well, when you do that, and it's kind of that's your first really foray into active duty.
Yeah.
You're a brand new butter bar. You haven't really done, I mean, you've gone to the schools, but you haven't really done anything. Are you thinking, yep, this was the best idea I've ever had? In everything that I've done so far, this is it. This kind of seals the deal and tells me I'm on the right track.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I mean, I loved every minute of it. I mean,
and
there wasn't a bad day,
Yeah, well, and it's crazy to hear that, because you get a lot of young officers that would say, yeah, it was great, but there's a huge learning curve, and they're not only learning their job, but they're learning how to be in charge of troops. Because, I mean, let's be honest, people don't really know how to be in charge. You have to be, I mean, there are leaders, but you have to be taught to be in charge. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I was, I was super grateful for Sergeant First Class Edwards, my first platoon sergeant, First Sergeant Lear, my first sergeant, and man, Sean Lear has some of the best sayings that I still throw out there every once in a while, because they're typical first sergeant type of sayings, and yeah, and those guys taught me everything I know, and they were, I mean, they were the kind of guys that were, hard chargers and respectable. They both had master wings, both tabs. I mean, so they just, you knew they had been through it all. I mean, Edwards and I had even, when the 82nd was kind of called on to do that Operation Uphold Democracy when we almost went into Haiti. Edwards, he was a primary on our bird, and I was the AJ on our bird and stuff. And so we just had a lot of like incredible experiences together. And he even, like, I remember when when he and I got offered jump masters on those planes going into Haiti, and we were like number 12. I think we were like the 12th C-141 going into Haiti. And he offered the PJ to me. And so these are just good dudes, had incredible NCOs around me. I mean, that's really probably the most valuable thing that I had in my kind of regular Army career that taught me, everything. And I was the kind of guy like you. I mean, if I looked at you and I could tell like you're a hard charger and you could take me, and I shouldn't say take, that sounds bad. If you could like take all I had to dish out and dish it back at me, like Sean Lear was definitely one of those guys. But like Sarned, he was more like, just had that look like, sir, you're being kind of stupid right now. And, and we just had some good times. And Sarned was like one of these dudes. I remember when the C-17 was just coming out, we got the chance to go to Yuma Proving Grounds for a month and test jump the C-17 every day. Like because they were still like designing the air dam that comes out the door on the C-17 for jumps, and the jump platform and stuff. And the first night jump that Sergeant Ed and I did, I was primary on that when he was AJ. And have you ever ridden in a C-17?
No, I have not.
Yeah, it's jumping out of a C-17 is a very unique experience because of the airflow around the door. Like it's calm. Like you stand there with the door open and there's like no jet blast there. It's like super calm. And we had done, I think, a couple of day jumps by this. And the first night jump, go out and do our first door check. And I come back in, giving Sergeant Ed the thumbs up. And he comes in from his door check and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. and it's just the kind of relationship he and I had. But yeah.
So let me ask you, in saying all that, with WestPoint and learning from those guys and kind of being taken under their wing by some of the guys there, and then by your enlisted guys there, I don't know if it's a fair question to say, who did you learn more from, enlisted or officers?
Oh, totally enlisted, man. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you go into a little bit of detail about that, about what exactly it was different about them? Because I think that people overlook that sometimes, the wealth of knowledge that comes from that backbone. I think people see stuff and don't really understand how those officers that are in the command position, how much they're built up from underneath with their guys.
Yeah. And really, if you think about it, man, like for an officer, for the most part, I mean, my son and I spend a lot of time talking about this, right? Because he's an officer. He's an XO for an infantry company, right? For a headquarters company in for CO4. And, it's the luck of the draw, for an officer, right? You get the soldiers that you get and they rotate out. But, in the reality, like as a platoon leader or company commander, you're spending 18 months, 2 years in those roles. And there's just not that much variability unless you affect big change in it. There's just, you have what you have. And so, I was super fortunate to have, people around me that were just amazing. And for me, dude, I dug a few foxholes leading up to my time as a platoon leader, but not that many. And we dug a ton of foxholes in a lot of different places. And, I remember, one of the first things I realized, because as an officer, you kind of plan things out, like how long it takes to do A, how long it takes to do B, because you got to have A, B, C, and D ready, right, at a certain time. And so I remember one time, like, we digging foxholes somewhere, and it took 2 hours longer to dig it in a different place. And I'm like, why is that? And so instead of just asking the question, the next time we had to dig foxholes, I went out there and I dug foxholes with the guys. Right. So I wanted to, and I did it several times so I could understand, like, really, like, what's different about it. Like, is there a way that I could help them do it better? If I can get backhoes in there or something to, like, understand that process for them and that workflow for them so that I could help them better. And I know when it was all said and done, I mean, guys appreciated that kind of respect and effort that I put in to understand what they did, and how they did it.
Well, let me ask you then, do you think that kind of leadership's gone these days?
Um, Wholesale, I don't, it'd be hard pressed to say that, right? I mean, I've got, some of my closest classmates, like General Chris Donahue, who was in the unit for a long time. He was squadron commander for the unit and took over the 82nd. Now he's 18th Airborne Corps. I mean, and then you had General Braga, that's SOCOM commander, and Todd, who was regiment commander and stuff. Like, I mean, those guys know it. Like, they know the importance of those non-commissioned officers in the units.
And not to interrupt you, but that's kind of my question is, I think that a lot of people know it, but do you think it's still around? Do you think it's put into action by people that aren't necessarily seeing those guys on the ground, that are so far removed from it? Is that being put into action anymore?
You mean at the, like, joint staff level?
I don't even know if maybe that high, but I'm saying the guys that aren't with guys on the ground on an everyday level, and you can speak to it from a military standpoint, I can speak to it on a law enforcement standpoint, but when people don't see every day how the gears get turned,
Yeah.
I think that that's where we get away from stuff, and it trickles down into good ideas aren't necessarily that good when put into action. So that's kind of my question is, do you think that leadership of, hey, it took us longer to do this, maybe I should figure out why instead of just asking someone who's going to give the answer that they want to give? Do you think that kind of leadership is gone?
In law enforcement, and I should say probably first responders as a whole, yes, 100%. Like, I shouldn't say 100. I mean, 99% of the time. Like, it seems I've yet to meet, a lieutenant or a captain, and I don't know where you are in PD, but I've yet to meet, a senior leader, I'd say, in a police department that really understands what's going on in the streets today, especially in EMS too. And those are probably the two in the first responder worlds that I've had the most experience with. And in smaller fire departments, those guys just, I think, because of the size, they are in touch, but the bigger departments, they're definitely out of touch. And then in the military, yeah, honestly, like, the leadership stuff that I see is just different than when I was in. Like, my son is super close or familiar with his soldiers in ways that just I wouldn't have ever done. Like, it's, and so it's, I don't know if it's just the cultural style of, like, where these guys are nowadays and how they interact with folks. It's just different. It was like he has interaction with his soldiers similar to, like, I did later in my career, the smaller units I was in and stuff. But yeah, I'd agree with you in a lot of ways. Leadership it's a skill, man. And, I've seen, especially when you start playing in kind of like the stress resiliency world that I play in with you guys and SWAT and EMS now, like, I mean, what you guys are going through, and I can quantify this and compare it to, like, what I see in the soft world and even tier 1 world. Like, the stress that first responders experience is at least 50% worse than what SOF and tier one guys experience. There's something about it that is just generates that much greater stress in the body, that I can't get any senior leader in a police department or EMS or fire to like understand that.
Okay, so let's go on this for a minute, because what do you think is the difference? Because when we're comparing the two, we're saying these soft guys that have been in sustained battle for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And when comparing it to a law enforcement, I don't know from a law enforcement point of view that there's really a comparison, because here's the way I think. There's a job over here and a job over here, and they're two different kinds of jobs. When you talk about the stress, though, it's not necessarily the stress from the job. Bad guys are going to be bad guys. Everybody knows that in both sides of the spectrum. The problem that you have is that you not only have bad guys to deal with, you also have the general public to deal with. And you've got a lot of people, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, that have a problem with no matter how a situation is handled, it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about the stress, I think about it differently. I'm not going to say that it's worse than those guys, because that's sustained combat in another country and all that kind of stuff. The stress that I talk about is dealing with your chain of command, dealing with the public in general, and just not ever knowing that you're right. You can think you are and be told you're not, over and over, by people that have never done the job. So I want to hear it from your point of view, how it's different and why there's so much more from the other side.
Yeah. And so I'll further qualify like what I was saying about this. And so the way that first responders carry the stress in their body is on average 50% worse than soft and tier one guys. And so what I mean by that is, and what drives that, right, is, it's the stress of everything. And so if you take just the organizational dynamics that you mentioned, the stress of doing your job on top of the corporate stuff that you have, just all the stress in your life, that comes from that, and even personal stuff, the way that you guys internalize it, and it's probably the volume of it as well, is way, like, it's literally not even on the scale compared to like what a soft operator or tier one operator experiences. And the way I can caveat that is so like the performance reboot that I do on guys, like I first developed that when we started shooting. And so the average soft guy, even tier one, is going to take a level of intensity from the NX Pro in the 21 to 27 range. And it's on a scale from 0 to 100. Okay. The average police officer is going to be on the high end of that. So probably in the 25 to 27 range. EMS and 911 operators, I'll tell you this, are usually in the 35 to 42 range. And so, and even tier one dudes, 21, 27. I mean, and so the volume, really, if you want, the medical concept here is called allostatic overload, or just allostatic load, that you guys experience it's way higher, than what the military experiences. And so that's what I'm referring to in this, and so what drives, I feel like a lot of that carriage of stress, or the carriage of that allostatic load in your body as a first responder, is you guys you haven't been taught the skills to cope with it, or what you're being taught clearly isn't sufficient enough to manage the allostasis and the stress, to where when you go into the soft world and even the tier one world, like, man, they've got all of the systems in place. They have all of the skills to ensure that they're ready to perform. I mean, the military has made that kind of investment in them that they have, you name it. And as a culture within those organizations, like going to psych to get your psych check to be able to like go back on mission or to go back on an operation, it's culturally okay. Like they wanted to go, they want to resolve it, they want to get through it so they can move on. And they it's not approach of like, what are the 5 things I got to say in order to get through this? It's like, if I get issues, I want to get done. I want to get them out. I want to get them over with and move on, as opposed to like, no, I'm not saying anything to anybody. I'm going to keep this in and not deal with it.
Don't you think, though, that if anything, that's within the past 5-10 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
For a long time, it was non-existent.
Totally. Yeah, totally, man.
And there's still ways, and I get completely what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that there is a stigma in law enforcement to say that you didn't handle something, that you're processing something, whatever it may be. I think that when you say that, though, and the not being able to either be taught or not being taught the right things, what's a solution to that then? Because there's really not one. Like I said, no matter which way you turn in a 360-degree circle, you're going to be wrong at some point in law enforcement, whether that be from the general public, whether that be from command, whether that be from fellow officers, whatever it may be. So what's the solution to that then?
To the being wrong, or the like dealing with that stress?
Dealing with the stress, because it's at every turning point.
Yeah, I honestly, that's the beauty of the reboot that we do, man. Because I mean, in 20 minutes, it brings the nervous system back to homeostasis or allostasis, to where you can, now you're at a place to where you can recognize the stress and you don't have to react to it, right? And so it gives the nervous system the ability to respond to the stress if it needs to, as opposed to already being at a heightened state of stress. So, imagine, I don't know if you have like regular calls, but a lot of the guys that are on patrol that I talk to, right, it's, 12-hour shift or whatever, however long the shift is, and it's high stress call after high stress call after high stress call, or it's 2 high stress calls and then a couple slow ones and then a series of high stress ones, right? And so depending upon the threat of those high stress calls drives your neurological response to that, right? And your ability, having the skills to be able to manage that, really, it'll either lengthen the amount of time it takes you to neurologically recover, or prevent you from recovering from it, or it'll shorten it, right? And so if you're in allostasis, or homeostasis is probably more the common term, you have the ability to really return to a normal state much quicker. And then so that next high stress call isn't such high stress, unless it really is, right? Unless it's, somebody shooting at you type stuff, as opposed to just somebody cussing you out, type of thing.
Right. Okay, so I want to go back to your career, because I want to keep tying back and forth into it, because I want people to understand how you got to this point to where you're talking about what you're talking about. So as we go back in, you were working out with a neighbor, hanging out with them, doing runs and stuff like that. And I want to talk about this job, because you and I said that we'll cover over it, but there's a lot of deep stuff in here that we don't want to necessarily get into. Let's talk about that, meeting that, and then I want to talk about how the shift kind of happens in your brain, because from everything that you say so far with the 82nd, you're jumping, it's the greatest thing that you've ever done. Now we're going to shift focus on what you're doing, and we need to kind of talk about what you were doing, but where that shift was, where now they're starting to be stressors, now they're starting to affect you, affect people around you, affect the family.
Yeah. So I had, was living in an apartment off Riley Road in Fort Bragg, which is back then, that's like where the bulk of the apartments were, that most military folks lived in. And the guy, like most apartments, right, there's like, or at least this place was just 2 doors opposite each other. type of thing. And the guy right across from us, like, I probably didn't, he wasn't there regularly, but when he was driving this brand new Corvette, and he was a good looking guy, never had a uniform on with name tapes on. Sometimes it'd show up in these like flight suits and stuff. And most times when I saw him like coming back home from work stuff, he just looked wrecked. Like he had been put through the ringer kind of stuff. And, probably after I'd been there a few months, he would, I think probably after just living in apartment complexes, right? And you have windows that are across from each other, and he'd see me kind of come down the stoop there and see me start stretching, and he'd start coming out on runs with me. And I didn't ask any questions, and he asked a lot of questions. And he was taller than I was, probably 2, 3, 4 inches taller than I was, but lean, fit, definitely an athletic kind of guy. And man, we just built a friendship, and it was all really over running on Sundays. And after about a year and a half of this, he came out one time, and I mean, I'd walked out to stretch and all that stuff. I mean, it was still dark, probably at 5:30 or so in the morning, and he had just pulled up, like in his car, like he'd been gone, and I hadn't seen him in days. I remember he got out of his car, and I could still see the look on his face, like, and I almost said something to him, but he was like, "You going on a run?" I was like, "Yep." He goes, "Hold on a minute." He comes back out in a pair of Ranger panties, and we go for what ended up being like 5-6 hour run. And I mean, he just asked a bunch of questions like, what if this, or what would you do in this kind of situation? What about this? Or tell me about, I mean, I didn't, honestly, like being the guy that I was back then, I had no idea like what he was really doing. And my mentality back then was just like, I'm just going to like do what I need to do to be successful. And if somebody puts a wall in front of me, I'm going to find a way through it or around it. And that's just kind of how I rolled. And my guys that, I worked with and guys in my platoon, like, I think they like that because like we just didn't take no for an answer. And I think people they liked that about me, right? Like I always said, I was always the kind of guy that I would figure it out and make it happen. And I remember as we were, there was this trail literally would come out in the parking lot, and then there was this hole in the fence, like right up, I mean, probably 50 feet from our front door that was Fort Bragg. And somebody had clearly cut a hole in the fence there. So we would cut through there because there were just trails and everything back there. And we were coming back. We had just kind of come back through the little hole there and in the fence. And he was like, he goes, one of my buddies is going to give you a call tomorrow to see if you want to come work with us. And I just kind of like downplayed. I was like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. And so I had gotten into work the next day. I think we had one phone in the company headquarters, right? And one computer in the company headquarters. It was still like, yes, I don't remember what it was, like an IBM PC XT thing that was like a green monitor and 3.5-inch floppy disk drives and stuff. But and we still had mimeograph machines then, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I think you're showing your age, Vance.
What's that?
I think you're showing your age.
Yeah, I remember doing training schedules on the mimeograph machine, man. Just
no, I never had to do that.
But
so let me ask you before you go on with this. This guy's obviously grooming you.
Yeah.
He has selected you out. Did he live there before you? Like, I'm thinking 30,000 feet now, way away from everything. Is this happening for a reason? Is he purposely? You see what I'm saying? Now that you've been in the business, now that you've done clandestine operations, things like that, are you thinking because I hear it and I think the guy was purposely going after you.
Yeah, I honestly, like, I never thought of Jack as that kind of way. Like, he'd been there some period of time before me. Um, and I just never the thought really had never entered my mind that it was that planned out. You know.
Okay. All right. When I hear it though, I think like, okay, he never answers any questions. He asks a lot of questions. He puts a lot of scenarios out there. He seems to show up when the runs happen, things like that. He's always got you alone. It sounds to me like he's grooming.
Yeah, but I would totally agree with that. But concept that, like, he was there, specifically for that, as opposed to, I guess I'm looking at it more as like it just happened. I happened to move in there next to him,
Okay.
and he happened to be living
Okay.
there, and that's the way I've always looked at it.
Okay. All right. So let's keep going. So you're expecting a phone
Yeah,
call.
yeah. Yeah, so I get the phone call the next day, and it was one of these, like, "Hey, show up 1300 hours. Here's the address tomorrow if you're interested." And I mean, it's 30 seconds, and so I knew that was the call, and it was this old fire station. Honestly, that if you're familiar with Bragg, I mean, it's if you kind of like look at a map of Bragg and just go all the way out to the eastern side, it's right on the road that goes out to Camp McCall. Like, there's this, it may still be there, I don't know, but it was this old fire station that used to be there. And I show up there, and it was a bunch of guys, six guys. Jack was not a part of that. And it was like a board style interview type of thing. And I don't know who any of these dudes were, or I didn't ask any questions, just answered them all. And I guess I passed that. And then I was, in the timing of it all, which, I mean, really taking your point into this, the timing of it all was precipitous, right? I was coming out of my platoon. It was that time in my career. And it was just the right time, right, for this stuff to happen. Because a lot of guys at Bragg, even in my day, right, they would go to Special Forces selection, type of thing about this time. And so it was all that kind of like thing that happened. And they'd asked a bunch of questions similar to like what he and I had talked about for the past 18 months. And so it was like one of these, I feel like I've been here before type of thing. Right. And so that was a few hours. And, again, like I was just the kind of person, I didn't ask questions about that stuff. And then it's probably, I think it was within a week. I had gotten verbal orders that I would be going on an assignment in a week, which was this training exercise that I was asked to be a part of, which was like their selection type of thing.
And so let's talk about personal life while this is going on right now. You're coming out of the platoon. You're married. It's not going great right now, correct?
Yeah, it was not going good.
I wanted to say it in the best way I could. It's not going great. So let's talk about those stressors with everything that's going on, because it definitely sheds a different light on what you're doing, and especially the way you and I talked about it, of how you looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, I was, originally I had gone. I mean, my plan, going back even to my WestPoint days, like I was going to go in the Army, go to 10th Group, no Russian, and I was going to go to Russia and fight the Russians, right? Because the wall was still up, Cold War was still going on, and then the wall fell down in '91, and I was 3 years into my study of Russia and was very almost fluent by then in Russian, and so I kind of just, that was my path. I mean, that was the world that I had set my mind to go into. And so, for some reason, like this, especially like once I got kind of through the selection, like I didn't know what it was still even at that time. And it seemed kind of sort of similar to that. And so I just kept going with it. But, the biggest reason that for me that I was doing that was just because I was having a bad time in the marriage, right? And I was looking for a way out, and I really looking away from it. I think, which is, just from being in that world back then, it was what a lot of us were dealing with, right? Because it's hard being in the Army, and it's hard, doing that married, and it's hard doing that with kids, and and doing that at, gosh, so I was 20, so I got married at 23, I think. Yeah, 22, 23. And my son was born, I was 25, which is young. That's why I tell my 10-year-old, like, she can't go on a date until she's 26.
Okay.
So,
I don't know if that's sound advice, but yeah, I have 3 daughters of my own. I don't know that. I think and I understand exactly what you're saying. It's hard. Yeah. Here's where it kind of didn't make sense to me. So your parents get divorced when you're 2, 18 months, whatever it is. In here, you can fight to stay married, kind of keep the family together, your kids, all that kind of stuff. But you turn away from it and kind of go, nah, I'm going to do my own thing. So I want to know kind of your ideas, because I've asked a lot of guys on the show, like, okay, so you've got the family. You've talked about you want the family. You want to be the dad and stuff. What makes you turn away from it and go into this? And I mean, let's be real, Vance. You're not asking any questions. You're just kind of whatever job they're going to give you. You're like, well, it's got to be better than what I'm doing right now. Like, there's no question at all to it. So I'm trying to understand the mind state behind it.
Yeah, I mean, to me it was more. I mean, that was like that world was where my goal was. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I'd had my mind set on that, and that had been my focus for, by that time for probably the previous 7 years. It's kind of what I've been working towards, and so it was, like I can remember, even like when we would go on big field problems, right? Even I'd be out in the field for 2-3 weeks, a month at a time. I mean, it was a relief, just because my first was a handful, more than a handful, and it was a relief to like get away from that, and so, it's probably fairly common in military culture, right? And you just I didn't have the maturity back then to be able to realize like what was really going on and to like own up to, my part in it. But the stress of that life, even as a lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne, right? I mean, my son's dealing with it right now, and he's doing a way better job than I was at the time. But yeah, I mean, the thought process for me, it was like, this is the goal and this is where I'm going. And, I made it pretty clear with my first wife, like, this is what we're doing, and you got to be on board with this.
Okay, so let me ask you then: Are you fighting with her? Or are you just ignoring her? Like, how are you dealing with it day to day?
Yeah, I mean, it was. It wasn't that I was ignoring. I mean, I'm normally like I don't back down on stuff. I mean, I was really probably in my 40s, late 40s, before I realized like I don't have to fight everything. So,
I think a lot of us realize it in the 40s.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of fights, that it was, and again, like, knowing what I know now, like I could have handled it way better. Right.
So with this, you're doing it, and you're kind of going through this selection. They're not really telling you when it ends or when it begins or anything like that. After 40 plus days, you start running your mouth.
Yeah, I didn't. It was just one time. I literally, like I think I said, it was like one sentence because
Yeah.
it was the same, or maybe two sentences. It was just, to me, it was just the same stuff. Like
I think it was one sentence. I think you said, I get it.
yeah, but it was just long ass movements, man. I mean, like what I know now, which is most type of selections, right? A lot of weight, a lot of long movements, and unknown times to like get there and challenges to like deal with. And to me, like, I had, we kind of glossed over like the orienteering stuff that I had done at WestPoint, but I like land nav was never an issue for me. I mean,
Right.
especially after doing that for 4 years. I mean, it was, I could literally, by the time I was a lieutenant in the Army, I could look at a map and the terrain features would just pop out. Like I could see things in 3D on a map and just that allowed me to literally, I could pick a course out and I could maintain that picture in my mind and navigate. I could do a 10-click movement and look at the map like twice, type thing. And that's all I was doing for like 40 days. And so I remember, I don't even think, it may not have been the end of one of these like multi-day movements, but I got to the end, right? I hadn't slept in like, fuck, I don't know, several days, definitely malnourished. And I just remember walking up to this dude that was standing in the road next to a truck. And I just told him, I was like, look, if you need to know if I can land nav, I got it. So what's next?
And they told you what was next.
Yeah.
17 days.
Yeah, it was, and I don't even know if that was like the deadline. Honestly, that's how long it took me. But they gave me lat long, which was the first time they had given me lat long, right? And so, because everything else was like grid coordinates, right? And so, just being able to use a grid map and a compass and protractor and all that jazz. But they gave me lat long, and I instantly knew where it was because I knew my geography of Russia. I knew my geography of Europe really well, just from everything I'd studied. And so I looked at it and I was like, oh, well. And I remember I looked at this and I was like, oh, this is going to be a fun one. and so I still didn't know exactly where I was, but I remembered where some highways were and hitched a ride to Richmond, Virginia, talked my way to literally ride on a DHL express plane to Europe because this was, late 90s. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so you could get away with anything.
You could pretty much do anything at an airport.
Yeah. So I remember I walked up to the DHL counter there and I asked the guy, I was like, hey, do you guys like need some help loading up a plane or anything like that? And he was like, yeah, we could sure use it. And I was like, well, you got any going to Europe? And he was like, yeah, we have 3. And I was like, well, where are they going? And he had one going, I don't know, like one up north, like to Stockholm or something, London, and then one way down south. I don't remember where the south one was going. And so I just picked the one going to Stockholm. And I was like, hey, I'll help load and stuff. And so I went out there and just, back then, that literally, man, they didn't have like those big containers that you see at the airports. Like I know you do airport stuff. Like you see them, like it was just like old luggage carts. Like you see loading luggage on an airplane full of boxes, and you're just like throwing boxes on the plane, type of thing. And did that for a few hours. Got a free ride to Europe. And then when I remember landing in Europe, I helped unload because that was like part of the deal, so I could get some cash. And helped unload and walked in to collect my money. And the guy at the desk I said, are you Vance? I was like, yeah. And because, right, I'm not in a DHL uniform or anything like that. So he probably knew that. And he hands me an envelope and there's new lat long on there. Because the first ones they gave me were in deep within Russia, like just south of St. Petersburg. And for whatever reason, like they pulled it into Poland. So because Poland was, I guess, a little bit easier to get into. But yeah, and then I just hopped on some trains, hitched some rides, and ended up, found a map, used the DHL map actually, and talked them into letting me take a map with me, so I could find this place. I knew where I was going and stuff, and ended up. But yeah, it took me 17 days to get there. But yeah, no ID, no money, type thing.
So let me ask you, when you do all this, you still haven't asked any questions. You make it through, you get selected into this. One, I want to know why you never ask questions. Like, did you just not care?
I've never thought about that. No, it was that I didn't care. It was just what I wanted to do.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you do it, but it's an incredible level of stressors on you because
Mm-hmm.
it's a daily, you're proving yourself every day in what you're doing. And especially in the stuff that you're doing. I want to talk about kind of the paranoia because we're still spy versus spy kind of stuff, but there's
Yeah.
paranoia involved, right?
Yeah, that didn't happen till the end, though. I mean,
Okay, so
yeah,
let's talk about the beginning then, because I do want to get to the paranoia because I think it's an
yeah.
important part of your story. Let's talk about as you're doing the job in the beginning. We don't have to say who you were working for or anything like that, but are you still enjoying it? Like that's
It was
what you wanted to do? Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it was fighting the bigger battle. I mean, it was early days on the war and terror, man. I mean, so we were all over Indonesia, back in when all those guys were like really kind of building everything around, everything that really GWAT was based on, and it's probably maybe, what we were doing in Indonesia and Indochina, all the South Pacific stuff that kind of pushed them into, they started looking for a new home and, found that in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And so we chased some of them into that part of the world. But it was mostly like South Pacific stuff for us. And it was a blast, man. We had fun, had a lot of fun.
Do you and think about the question before you say anything. Do
Mhm.
you lose yourself?
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's a good question.
So let's talk about that losing yourself because you're kind of losing everything. You're becoming a new person. But I always like to ask people that are working undercover or people that are doing clandestine stuff, are you
Mhm.
becoming the person that you need to be for the job or are you becoming who you really are and that person is just now coming out? The true person is coming out.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was probably more just that's who I was. I mean, yeah, it was a happy place for me. Yeah, I mean, there were times, main parachute malfunctions, just dude, you name it, high stress stuff that happened that, and even at that age, some late 20, it probably really started happening around 30. Even at that age, it's just, you're super young and you don't realize like what all of that does to you, you know, and so we're able to like just compartmentalize it, and it's really cool for what it is. And um yeah, and so it was my happy place. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I loved every minute of it.
Still
Until I
married at the
realized I
time?
was like, oh yeah, yeah,
Okay. So let's talk about that because old Vance isn't home as often. He's kind of home as much as the guy next door that he did the runs with. So what's all going on
yeah,
there?
yeah. I mean, that's really probably the biggest stressor of it. I was like, I couldn't talk about it, right? I couldn't say anything where it was.
Right.
I agreed to that. I mean, and most of it was like cover jobs. Like I had, um, once I had gotten selected, like I moved into our battalion S4 role, and it was, primary staff job is a primary staff job, but again, it was credible S4 shop, and they were kind of like aware of what was going, at least aware of kind of what I was doing. I don't know how much they knew, and we never talked about it, type of thing. But I wasn't there that much at all. But there were always cover stories that we were all part of, type of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest stress on my first marriage, man, was, I mean, honestly, so that was, from doing the math in my head here. So 93 to 90, I mean, so from 97 to, yeah, I mean, 6, 7 years really of, no truth around that.
That's what I was just about to say. When everything in your life is a lie, how do
Yeah.
you even come to the truth?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the lack of awareness that I had around it was like acknowledging it for what it is. I think I tried to like make the cover the truth, and force it rather than just allowing it to like sit, or I don't fucking know. But that was the bulk of it, right? And I'm not a good liar, so it's
Well, I think you had to be okay at it.
yeah. But most people that are intuitive, they can sense the energy and know that it's not real. And but yeah, that was the biggest challenge, was just the years of no truth around everything, and it adds up.
Okay, so let's talk as these years, because we said that we wouldn't go too deep into it. Let's
Yeah.
talk about as it's gone on, and you're further in the career. This has been going on for quite a while. So what's it doing to you? By the end, what's it doing to you?
Yeah, so I would really, what the straw that broke the camel's back for me was my cover job. My last cover job, really, in the Army, was working at the White House, and I was in Presidential Contingency Programs office, and it seems like I'd always ended up in these roles, like no real heavy lifting, but so there was enough for me to like be there to appear to be there, type of thing. And as you probably know from talking to people around the world, like it seems like we have these kind of people like everywhere, and a lot of universities and a lot of companies, and they're just for whatever reasons they're everywhere, it seems. But anyway, like we had been in DC for a few months, and we were doing some training up in Northwest DC. We had a facility up there, and it was a week long training, and intended to be. And like everything around the whole training session this was going to be a week, and we knew this. And so the iterations we were doing, we were in there super early, around 6 in the morning, and we were working till probably 6, 7, 8 o'clock every night. And then something happened on Wednesday, and so we broke at lunch that day. And so to get there, I would park my car at the Springfield Metro, stop in Northern Virginia, take the Springfield train in on the Blue Line all into town, and then take a couple more stops up to where this was. And so I was doing the reverse. But so I'd been on that schedule for 2 days, right? This is Wednesday. So I roll out of there middle of the day and leaning up against the railing. We're sitting on a bench, waiting for my train to show up. And this woman comes and just gets like closer than a wife would sit close to you, like right next to you. And super beautiful woman. She was, I assume she was Indian at the time, because dark skin, a little bit of that type of accent and stuff. Starts asking me all these questions, and within like 2 minutes, she's asking me about my marriage and asking like questions that at the time I just felt like were really inappropriate, and so I'd just wasn't comfortable like even answering that type of stuff. And so train came up, I got on the train, and she said she was waiting on the same train too, but as the train pulls off, she's still sitting there, right? So she didn't get on the same train. And so, and now this is start running through my head, and I'm like, these questions are just too, like, she knows something somehow, some way. Like she wouldn't be able to ask like how's my relationship with my wife? Am I fighting? Are we fighting a lot? I mean, just stuff that she had to know something. And so by then, we made a couple stops on the train, and then I was like, this isn't right. And so we had a security guy at the White House that was responsible for our work. And so I roll up to his office, and because it was a few stops down from where we were, and I tell him what's going on. I'm like, hey, this, that just happened. And he like didn't pause for a moment, and he was like, yeah, we knew they were after you. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, there's a few countries that have you targeted. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, when were you going to let me in on this now, guy? Type of thing. And I was like, well, what other countries? And he was like, Russia, India, China. And there's like one more in there. But he kind of lost me at the Russia one too, because when I'd first moved to DC, my wife and I had two kids by this time. They were still at Campbell and at school and stuff. And so I moved up there, got a temporary apartment and stuff. My mom was there. Yeah. So I was staying with my mom those first 6 months while I found a house that we ended up buying in her apartment building. And so every morning I go down to the gym, because again, this is like my first assignment that's like not on a military installation, right? And so go down to the gym every morning. I'm doing PT, working out, all the normal stuff to stay fit type of thing. And probably a week after I got there, this Russian woman started working out at the same time in the morning as I did. And she was beautiful too. And the fact that she was Russian, and so we would speak Russian and all this stuff. And that went on for several months. And then all of a sudden one day she was gone. And so when security told me this, I was like, then I would share this about the Russian woman. He was like, yeah, we knew that was going on. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, and one, I guess maybe they assumed I should have asked that question, that I was aware. And I was not aware. Right. But that was the moment. Like for me, man, it just started unraveling. And there were just so many other things that had happened that it was just weird stuff. I mean, like we would roll up, there'd be a lot of times through the years, like we'd roll up on objective, and, it'd be like, there'd be other people there. It'd be like, huh, you're an American. I'm an American. Those other guys that are with you are American. I'm like, what are you guys doing here? And they'd be like, what are you doing here? And I don't know if those two worlds like weren't ever supposed to meet type of thing. But anyway, so that day though, I get back on the train, and one of my neighbors just around the corner was one of our tech guys, and at the White House. So he was actually the guy that I would send out to like do some of the counter communication stuff that we were doing at PCP. And so he knew how to like look for bugs and those type of things. I just had the like wild hair to like have him come in and just see if there was anything in this house that we had just bought, just renovated. So hardwood floors everywhere, ripping out walls, all the normal, like not normal, but it was a lot of work. Right. And I'm gone a lot. So there's really like very little oversight on who's coming in and out of the house and all that type of stuff. And so it was a target rich environment. And so he rolls in there and starts pulling out all this stuff from all these bugs that are from Russia, from India, from China, and American, tons of American shit. And I asked him, like, dude, I'm like, is this normal? Like, he goes, nah, like, especially to see our shit like mixed in with all of this. He was like, no, this isn't normal. Like there's something going on here that like we're not, none of us are aware of like what any of this was. And so, and he had this one machine, this one little device that would like fry him. And so he couldn't like get to all of them because there were some that were like under the hardwood floors that couldn't get through like hardwood stuff. But yeah, I mean, from that point on, and that just for me just added a whole nother level of stress, right? Because there were a couple times, I mean, just because the cover gig I had was TSSCI Yankee White type stuff. And so there were a couple times I would take my ex into the yard and we would talk about shit, but, still like having to manage all of this craziness, like it was just too much for me. And so that's when I kind of let that roll for about a month. And then I was like, I just kind of gave him my notice and started figuring out like how I could get out of this. Cause I just couldn't deal with it.
So you move on, and is this when you go to the continuity of operations program? Is that when you start working that?
At the Pentagon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you leave that. You also get a divorce before you take that job, right?
No, it was. It was still a few years. I mean, I still had a few more years of that. So, yeah. Yeah.
It's whenever we talk about it, it's so funny to me because you look so far back and go, yeah, I was just trying to get out. And then you look 8 years down the road. Nope, they're still there.
Yeah.
And then so you start using this, you start doing this continuity of operations program. You said that you wanted to talk about 9/11 a little bit, and I want to talk to you about it because there was some stuff that you did on 9/11. And then I want to talk to you about kind of some of the faults and stuff that you said. And then we're going to get into, wrapping it up about what you've done after that and what you're doing now. So, let's first talk about the Army continuity of operations, what you're doing there, what that all has to deal with, and then let's get into 9/11.
Yeah, it was, and so the Army, and they still run it for DOD or for non-military folks. So the Department of Defense or DOD World and COOP or continuity of operations. Like this is all the continuity of government stuff that most people think is like conspiracy theory type of jazz and stuff. And so the gig I had at the White House was really kind of the pinnacle of that program. And so all of the other ancillary programs within DOD and within the Congress kind of supported what we did at the White House. And so I knew that whole system. And so one of the contractors that worked for me at the White House, they had an opening for the DOD program that was run by the Army. The Army runs the whole Department of Defense program. And so they own all the facilities. They own all the aircraft that like relocate key leaders in Department of Defense and that type of stuff. And it sounded fun, right? I mean, it was sounded like a good gig. And as an Army guy, right, I think I went from making $47,000 a year with 2 kids living in, Northern Virginia / DC to doubling that in a day, type of thing. I mean, it was a good amount of money. And then the other driver that I think that started kind of piquing my interest was some of the people that I was working with at the White House. These were like Harvard, Columbia, insert your Ivy League school of choice. Brilliant people. I mean, it was Clinton's administration, the first few years I was there, first 2 years. And so regardless of the party, these were still smart people, like really smart. And, you probably remember how old are your daughters, Ken?
So my oldest is almost 17.
Yeah. So, when they're like 5 and 3, like you think they have the cure for cancer locked up inside their head, right? And it's your responsibility as a parent to get it out. So, and as a captain, even, I was making some hazardous duty pay and some jump pay and that type of stuff, it was still chump change. And to be able to like provide that kind of education for my kids wasn't an option. And so this all kind of, seriously, man, within a year, it like just all flipped for me. And I remember walking into the GS-15's office at the Pentagon on my first day. And he was like, yeah, happy to have you on board. And the first thing that you guys need to do is rewrite the DoD COOP plan, continuity of operations plan. And so by then I had already like read through it, and it's a few hundred pages of an op order style kind of thing that just deals with relocation of the key leaders, right? Where everybody's going, how they're doing it, the timing of it all, and all that normal op order type stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool. I've written a few op orders in my life. And he says, your deadline is August 31st, 2001. And I was like, got it, right? Because, I had no idea what was going to happen. Like,
you think?
12 days later. Right. And so what was even, and, looking back on it, it's even funnier because, the current plan wasn't like that out of date. It was like most things at that level, updating the intel estimate, some aircraft change and some other things, but I felt like it was more busy work than actual like material work than anything. But part of the intel estimate that we had to include that I sat down with agency guys on and they laid out for me was somebody flying airplanes into buildings in the US, right? Like it was there. And so we finished rewriting it. I mean, I had 120 people on my team at the time, with all these different facilities and everything we had going on at the Pentagon. And so worked through all of that. We literally had to train all the key leaders, all their aides, put this program in place because back then, like, dude, you didn't have secure cell phones. I mean, it was key card type stuff. Like you would get a call in the clear over your brick of a cell phone, right? It's about this as big as my Yeti cup here. And it's all in the clear. You'd be given a code word, a challenge. You'd have to come back with the proper countersign that's in the aide's book, right? So you had to pull out the book, tell you the proper word. We would tell him what card to pull out, what card to crack open. That then, told him where he had to be. And he had like, depending upon where they were in town, they had like 10 minutes to get there. And if they weren't going to be there to get picked up, next one in line gets it, type of thing. So we'd finished all this. And the last piece that I couldn't get to work was the HF radio network that connects the DoD's facilities for continuity. And there's about 10 different organizations that are on this HF radio network. And so for you non-comms guys out there, HF radio is this old token ring technology that in order for everybody to talk, everybody's radio has to be on and it has to work because the way it works is it's not like it's broadcast, but each subsequent radio passes on the message type of thing.
It's almost like a telephone game.
Almost like a telephone game, right? The value of HF radio is that it works under nuclear fallout, right? So in a nuclear emergency, right, fallout stays about 2,000 feet above the ground. And so HF radio will just sit there and bounce underneath that. And so you can still communicate. And it's really the only means of communication that you have in that scenario. So it was kind of important. And so we couldn't get this to work remotely. And so I had the bright idea to have a meeting at SIDAR, which most people know, SIDAR has its own Wikipedia page and has for many years, which is the DoD's primary facility. But I decided to have a meeting on September 11th, 2001 at 0900 at SIDAR with all the tenants of all these different facilities and Harris Telecommunications that made these radios. And we were going to fix it on that day because these radios weren't that big. I mean, they're like a little bit bigger than a shoebox type of thing, and there weren't a ton of parts in there. And so we could swap parts out. I had 12 brand new radios if I needed to like replace everybody's, but we were going to fix it. That was going to be the day. Done. September 11th, 2001. And so, I mean, there's a lot of other things that happened, but I remember we had just finished renovating the Chief of Staff of the Army's conference room in this hole in the ground, right, 700 feet underground. So this is 2001. Mahogany rear screen projection. It was high speed, and back then. And so I'm like standing at the podium in this like big conference room. There's a door right here to my right. A few of my guys are out in front of me sitting in chairs, and when we had CNN going on behind me, and one of my guys just got this like quizzical look on his face, and I turned around and it was Trade Center, CNN with Trade Center 1 smoking. And right about that time, the Army 06 that runs Side R comes around the corner, and he's standing in the doorway right here next to me. And the alternate National Military Command Center, NMCC, was 2 doors down from where we were. And so I'd asked this Army 06, I was like, hey, just go down and see what they know. And he came back like 2 minutes later, and he was like, it's like fucking craziness. They have no idea what's going on. And so, and right about that time, it was the time that the second plane hit Trade Center 2. And so up until then, we had kind of, and the chatter on most of the command networks was, it was, some little plane, because nobody had any video yet of like the first plane really like slamming into Trade Center 1. But when we saw, the second plane on live TV hit Trade Center 2, Army 06 looks at me, and so normally my boss, this GS-15 that ran this office, he was the guy that made the call to start relocation for everybody. We had already tried to call him, couldn't reach him, and he's like, well, Vance, you're the only one that knows this shit, so what do you want to do? And so I was the guy that initiated relocation of DOD leadership on September 11th, 2001. And then right after that, we had gotten Rumsfeld, who was obviously SecDef, Wolfowitz, who was DepSecDef, General Shelton was chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time, General Shinseki was Secretary of the Army at the time, or Chief of Staff of the Army. And then the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and I can't remember, Chief of Staff of the Navy was AWOL. I can't remember what happened to him. But once I had gotten all three of these guys up in the air, we failed over control from the primary National Military Command Center at the Pentagon, because by then Sector E had been hit at the Pentagon. And so NMCC was a long way from that. But, dude, after that second plane hit, like the chatter on all the networks, on fucking everything, was just like nobody knew anything, what was going on. And the stuff we heard coming across every means of communication was just craziness. And so nobody knew anything. And so we went ahead and failed over control of the military to the alternate there at Site R. And then, the big thing that was running around then was, people that were honestly like out all over around DC with anti-missile aircraft, trying to shoot down airplanes. It was just nuts. And so I jumped in a van, drove out of Site R up to the landing pad, because I knew everybody was coming in. And this little E5 was standing there trying to land like a single Huey or a Blackhawk at a time on this LZ. That I'm looking at this, and I was like, man, you could fit 4 fucking helicopters on this thing like right now. And so I rolled up there, landed, because I'm looking up, and I can see all these helicopters just lined up, waiting to come in. And so I land all these dudes, and I'm riding in the van underground, 700 feet underground with all of them. I look Rumsfeld in the face, and I was the guy that looked him in the face and said, sir, we think 50,000 people could have died when the trade centers fell, because they fell when all of them were in flight, and they have some comms in the aircraft, but they didn't know what had happened, like in the 22 minutes it took them to get up there.
So what do you think the failure was that day? Because yours is an interesting idea to me. I've never really heard anyone say this idea.
Dude, I mean, I don't, I mean, what do you mean by failure, I guess?
Well, so when you talked about it, you said that there was a lot of IT failure that day.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but I've also heard intelligence sharing, all that kind of stuff. But I'd never heard someone say IT failures that day.
I mean, it was within DOD at the time. Like that was a big problem. Like, I mean, for the conspiracy theory guys that are out there, like, man, the stuff heard happening on, for the week subsequent to everything, because I'm sitting in the back of the National Military Command Center and a lot of these briefs and hearing what's going on and what we're seeing around the world and stuff. And I heard a lot of things that we can talk about if you want to that make me question like the reality of what happened on September 11th. You know, but within DOD, yeah, I mean, IT failover was a huge problem. Like it was a huge problem. Like if the E sector hadn't been hit at the Pentagon, it probably wouldn't have been such an issue. But I mean, that was where the Navy Command Center was, and so the data center for them was right next to that, and that was about to be burned to the ground, and the Navy leadership wouldn't have had email, like, because there was no failover for them, and so when we my kind of chief of staff for everything we had at the Pentagon was this retired Marine Corps Sergeant Major or Master, whatever they are, and E9 in the Marine Corps is, I can't remember, Bruce was his name. And the other funny story about September 11th, like, we couldn't call anybody. Like, the only way we had to communicate was BlackBerry Messenger. Like, BlackBerry Messenger, BBM saved the day, like, saved the country. I mean, honestly, on what was going on. And so we were messaging back and forth. And he told me like where the fire was, and we all knew what was there. And so I had two guys that knew where those Navy email servers were. And so we had a Blackhawk sitting there at Site R. I put him on a Blackhawk, sent him back to the Pentagon to like rip those servers out of the rack before they burned. I mean, that's how we failed over Navy email on September 11th.
So with everything that you did military wise, civilian wise, doing that job, and you look back on it, is there anything that you would have liked to change, or anything that, I don't want to say a failure, but anything that you maybe could have done better?
Yeah. I mean, if I could, my last probably, when I knew that I was able to like leave all my super classified stuff, and I knew that was going to happen. I'd spent probably the last few months trying to convert my job at the White House to a civilian job, and I wasn't able to like pull that off. If I could have pulled that off, man, that'd have been cool, because that was a cool gig.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Cool. Let's talk about what you did after the military. I want to talk about your racing a little bit, and then I want to talk about what you're doing right now. The racing is interesting to me because you say at one point you went from like 185 doing the job to like 255. You had given up running, given up kind of PT and stuff, and you got back into it. And the way you got back into it was to run 100-mile ultra marathons. Yeah. I don't think that's how most people get back into the game.
50 mile. I started with 50s. But yeah, it was my wife's fault, really. My current wife.
Okay. So I want to set this up. The first wife is now officially gone, correct?
Yes, she's
okay.
Yeah, 03 was when that started. 04 when it was final. But yeah, and so we had. So I had my first two kids for visitation down here in Austin, and if you're from Texas, most people know we have Lake Travis here and a couple other lakes and stuff. And so we had the kids at this one weekend, and so we ran out and rented a boat out of Lake Travis. right? And so my son, I think, was probably 11 or so at the time. And he's, you imagine driving a powerboat, ski boat, or something like that. He's sitting in the driver's seat, the captain's seat, and I'm sitting on the seat right behind him, and he's kind of like in between my legs, and I'm helping him like steer the boat and stuff. And my wife takes this like profile shot, thinking it was a really good father-son like picture, right, from the side. And it's an amazing picture, except for like my massive belly that you could see in the picture. and so, I just didn't realize like how big I had gotten at the time, because I didn't like weigh myself. And I was like threw myself kind of, I feel like probably like I've done most of my life, threw myself into my job at the time. And I didn't need to be like fit like I needed to be before. And so, I just let it go. And, started running and, ran a couple marathons and didn't feel like that was enough. And so that was when I was like, oh, I wonder what it'd be. I actually had the kooky idea of like, I wonder if I could do like two marathons in a weekend. And that was kind of what got me started on ultra marathon stuff. And so, I started running 50s and 100s and, played around with that. And, really when you try to push your body like that, you have to learn a lot about the body. And those years, man, have given me the foundation of everything that I'm doing now. Because, I remember getting to the point, like one of the first like 20-mile runs I had done for training. And where we live in Austin, we're right on Barton Creek Greenbelt. And for those of you not familiar with Barton Creek Greenbelt, it's one of the gems that Austin has. It's literally probably hundreds of miles of trails right in the middle of town. Like I can run out my door, literally jump the curb right across here, get on some dirt, and I can be on dirt trails all the way to within about a mile of the capital of Texas. And it'll take me like probably 40 minutes to get there on a mountain bike. It's Barton Creek Greenbelt's an amazing place. And so
you go by the bats.
Yeah, you go right by the bats. Yeah. So
I just had to ask.
Yeah. So I'd hooked up with one of these ultra running groups, and I remember the first 20-mile runs I'd done, and I'm like racking my brain, like, why does my body hurt so bad to like just run 20 miles? I need to be able to run 50 miles. And so you start learning biomechanics, you start understanding nutrition, you start learning just how the body works. And you kind of get to the point to where you can do more and more and more, and you just keep pushing. That's kind of how it all went.
And so what I want to talk about, though, what was interesting to me was when you get that third meniscus tear and you start using the NX Pro and you're doing the rehab and stuff, and I think New Tech was part of it, and then the NX Pro, and you start using it, it's I'm guessing from everything that I read on it and stuff, it's like a TENS machine, or it's like a shock machine to kind of to heal the body. But I'm wondering where you got the idea that, hey, this is healing me, but I could use this to do something else, which you would never think the two go together.
Yeah. And so the difference, or what's unique to the NX Pro is, right, a TENS unit is just alternating current. So it's just the kind of electricity that comes out of a plug on a wall. Right. And so that's what makes muscles seize with a TENS unit. And so the kind of like the physiological effect that you get from that, right, is you're making muscles involuntarily contract, which draws blood flow to the muscles. And so for like lactate and recovery and that type of stuff, it's super good for that. And so what NuX has figured out a way to do is create a blended waveform of AC current and DC current. And so like if you're running the NX Pro at say 250 hertz, which is a lengthening frequency for muscles, that that waveform is switching from alternating current to direct current 250 times a second, right? And so your body is absolutely unaware of that. And so you can increase the intensity level to where you get some muscle compensation or muscle movement. But depending upon what the desired outcome is, you may want that, you may not want that, depending upon what the activity is. But the benefit of it is you have the AC part of the waveform, which talks to motor neurons. And so it recruits more motor units in a muscle. The DC current is, and I, at the time, like I didn't understand what I do now about it after doing this for 2 years. The DC current waveform is nearly physiologically similar to the waveforms and wave frequencies that the parasympathetic nervous system uses to communicate with the body. All right. So, the autonomic nervous system has two sides, right? Sympathetic, which is stress, right? Which is when we're going into a gunfight or going into a high stress situation, that's what gets triggered. Makes the pupils dilate, makes your breathing rate increase, makes your heart rate increase, blood pressure increase, narrows the vision, all that's sympathetic nervous system. And so parasympathetic is what's called feed and breathe. And so it's just the inverse of all that, right? Expands the vision, slows the breathing, decreases blood pressure, all that type stuff. And so, at the time, like I didn't understand that type of thing. But the benefit of it from a training perspective is when you apply this waveform to a muscle, you're recruiting 2,000 times the motor units that you normally would. And so a motor unit is the individual muscle cell that the brain calls on to do a task. Shoot a gun, lift a piece of paper, lift this up. Like, that's just, the brain doesn't like think through of like, oh, what do I need to do to lift this? It's like, oh, I've lifted this 1,000,000 times. I'm going to do the same. It's kind of like a computer program. I've done it 1,000,000 times. I'm going to call on the same motor units, same movement to do this. And so what the NX Pro was able to do is say, well, hold on a second. There's 2,000 times more motor units down here for you to take a look at, Mr. Brain. And so what does it do? The brain's like, oh, I forgot about those guys. And so it starts to relearn whatever that skill is of choice that you're doing with this thing attached to you. And so for me, I, in the midst of COVID, change the workouts that I was doing. So I was running down the street out here with a 100-pound sandbag on my back and tore that third meniscus. And so found a doctor to do some regenerative stuff on me because I had a couple that said, well, the options are take your meniscus out, and then in about 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to have both your knees replaced. Or you can take your meniscus out. It's like that's all they were saying. And it wasn't, I didn't feel like it was so bad that was my only option. And so found a regenerative doctor that really amazing skills and was able to, at what feels like, and after a subsequent MRI, heal a lot of the cartilage damage that I had, heals all 3 of my meniscus. And so part of my recovery from that was working with a PT here in town with the NX Pro. And so 5 weeks after I had 52 injections into my knees, I was squatting 375 again. 7 weeks, I was back up to 405. Like, I mean, this is not normal, to be able to come out of something like this. So that, because some of these injections, man, like it's literally a hollow nail that he is shoving into my femur and my tib fib to like put all this healthy stuff in there, because healthy bone grows healthy cartilage, right? And so it was about that time, just things started clicking. I was like, I wonder if this could help you shoot better. Because there was this one dude on my team, man, it was like out of a movie. He was so good, so fast. And, one of my early missions, like he drew the card to be breacher that day. And, he was so much faster than all of us. Like we literally we're probably 50% faster than we normally would be, just because his vision was so much more broad, and he was able to engage targets so much faster than we could. And I've always been enamored by him because of it, and that's really kind of what got me thinking about the shooting piece of it. And so, got some guys together. A couple of them I knew, a bunch of them I didn't, and we went to the range and tried this out. And sure enough, man, I mean, his first group was like, I think 23, 26% faster, and then expanded that, doubled that. I think we had 12 the second time we went to the range, and started wondering if accuracy would be a piece of it. And really all the guys that I hit the first time, they were all, I think 25, 30% more accurate and still getting faster. I mean, it was, and the other weird thing that, I mean, like I remember the first guy I put on the firing line connected with the NX Pro, and he was an older guy at the time. He's probably like 60 at the time. And he wore glasses, and he was like, man, the lines on the targets are super clear. Like, I don't normally see this good. and other dudes were like, man, I don't have tunnel vision. Like, I can see everything in front of me. And after a couple reps, guys are like, I'm looking at the fifth target, and as I'm pulling the trigger on the first, and the body is just like following suit. Like, I don't even have to think about this anymore. And so, yeah, that's when, I took this back to Nuix, and Nuix was really interested in that. And so worked for them for about a year. And, this play just takes a long time. And Nuix wants to sell machines. And what I soon found out from working with departments and, other soft units and stuff is like that, especially in the big government world or big military world, like to buy a capital expenditure, is a process, but to buy training is not a process. Like, there's a credit card here and they can buy it. And so that's the world that we started playing in. And that wasn't the world Nuix wanted to play in. And so we, Harold and I bounced and started Autotelic in January. And have been doing that since, because what we found is, it's more than anything, like what I've learned over the last couple of years is a skill. Like, I can, the old school mentality of firearms training of like taking guys to like just burning them into the ground, right, and shooting 8 hours a day, like a lot of guys did going through the police academy. It works, right? You learn how to shoot, but does it need to be that way? And so we've proven with a couple departments now that we can take officers with, like, fresh out of the academy, say under 2 years of experience, and in about 45 minutes they're as fast and accurate as an officer with 10 years. Like, it's other world, right? Because the concept, what happens is, when you're putting this much energy into the nervous system, the brain thinks that it's getting 250 repetitions a second.
That's a lot.
Right. So you can do the math, right? Even, 250 reps a second, so let's just say, we're doing that 15,000 times a minute, right? And if you do 15,000 times, let's say 20 minutes, 20 minutes, your brain and nervous system feel like it's gotten 300,000 reps. Sorry.
So let's talk about that then, since you brought that up. I want to go over some numbers. 45 minutes of training, 150 rounds of ammunition. You have a 50% stress reduction, 30% focus increase, and it can allow 80 officers to be trained in 120 minutes.
80 officers would be like the reboot time. I mean, we can do, so reboot, I mean, like firearms training, we can do probably 10 at a time.
Okay.
But
you're talking now, is that the 45 minutes of training, or is that the reboot too?
Yeah, no, reboot's just 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do 10 at a time, 45 minutes of training. How many can you, when you're selling this to an organization that has to get a lot of people through, because I've heard you talk about remedial shooters and stuff like that, that have to get an extraordinary amount of officers through. How much can you get through in a week's time? And what are we looking at on results of that?
Yeah, a week. You could probably, I mean, realistically, do some quick math. You could probably do, I mean, depending upon how many hours a day, right? 50, 60 a day. So, probably 300 in a week, somewhere in there.
And you're looking at that 50% stress reduction, 30% focus increase. Now, what does that mean for the normal person looking in from the outside for a law enforcement point of view when you have, and I know it sounds like a very basic question, but I think it's an important one to ask.
Yeah.
Looking in from the outside, and you have shooters that are more capable, faster on target, accuracy, what does that mean for a police department?
I think it's a precision thing, right, for you guys. And so at the end of the day, one of the, especially when I started pushing into the law enforcement world, I mean, of the couple hundred folks that I've worked with, it is really like law enforcement. 80% of your first round is going to hit. That's just the way you guys are trained, right? Now the second round, there's a big question there, but you do that, right? Because at least 80% of your first rounds need to hit, right? Because you're most likely in a crowded situation. And so there are people that aren't probably a target that are around the target. And so you got to be precise. And so, the difference is, I feel like it's a survivability thing also, because like we normally we can cut draw times in half, especially on the law enforcement side, so if you're able to get on target half second faster, that type of stuff. I mean, there's a massive survivability aspect for the officer itself. A huge precision increase that comes with this, because the concept of, let's say you can get 300,000 reps in 20 minutes. You can't get there any other way. Like back when, ammo was outrageously expensive, about a year and a half ago, like I'd work through.
Or last week.
Yeah. I'd work through a couple models, right? Like for some departments, it was like a couple $100,000 a year just in ammo savings. If you cut just training academies, the firearms part of training academies in half, because, and the way we had I'd figured this out is, like I don't want to be a firearms trainer. Like I don't want range master's gig. And so what we've done with a couple departments is we just overlay, right? So I manage the machines, pack guys up, you run your normal training, do your thing, and the results happen in half the time. I mean, that's the crazy stuff, because
it's super interesting because it's so counterintuitive that it would be less time for more training.
Yeah.
That's what's so crazy. And I think that's where people on the outside look at it and go, it's not possible. You can't train half the time and get better results.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so that's where, like for us, the firearms piece is struggling to get in departments, probably for that reason, and the cost of inflation nowadays, right? And so the gas that you guys are paying for in departments, everything has gotten more expensive, right? And you can't budget for a double increase in gas and all of those type of things, that are going on. And so money's just not there. And so we're doing some stuff with the Texas state government to create some grant programs for departments to have available to be able to take advantage of this. But, that the money side is always an issue. And so this foreign concept of, one, putting electricity into the body, type of thing is something that is very unique. And so the other, really the bigger thing that has taken hold probably in the last 6 months is just first responder wellness. I know I've seen some announcements in the paper for the Dallas Police Department, right? There's some big moves that you guys have been making around that, but taking care of first responders. And so we've been doing, and I've done probably in the last week, close to 50 reboots here in town for first responders. Done a lot of EMS work, a lot more police too. Just because it's a need. Like, I got dudes that text me in the middle of the night, man. Hey, can you meet me for coffee tomorrow? Type of thing.
Well, so let's wrap this up with that. Yeah. So how can people or departments get a hold of you if they want to do the reboot program? Because from what you're saying just now, can it be individuals that get a hold of you for a reboot?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, so let's talk about how people can get a hold of you.
Yeah, I mean, the best way, right, is you can just hit us on our website, right, which is at-ps.com. And so there's a little page on there that you can drop your info into. My email is vance.mcmurry@at-ps.com, or my mobile is 512-517-8946. And so, because the biggest thing, man, is it makes a difference. And it makes a difference in 20 minutes, and it lasts for anywhere from, depending upon the kind of role that you're in, anywhere from 10 days to a month. One reboot does. And then the second reboot, that passive time doubles in length, and that doubling continues to occur. So let's say if you get 2 weeks of, relaxed state out of the first one, the second one, you're going to get a month. Third one, you're going to get 2 months, and so after about 6, you have about 6-8 months a year of this kind of heightened state of relaxedness, that type of thing happening.
Okay, so with everyone being able to get a hold of you, they can find prices, all that kind of stuff once they go to the website. And if you'll give that one more time.
Yeah, it's at-ps.com.
Well, you've got an amazing story. You and I have talked for a while on the phone and stuff, trying to get this set up.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing from what you did in the military to what you're doing now. I think that it's going to make a big impact later on. I think once all of the scientific research is completed, and this has been going for a while, so you have that backup data to show all this, I think that it'll be all over the United States. It's a very cool idea. So, guys, I think that's going to be it for the show. I'll have on the website everywhere that you can find Vance and get a hold of him. If you want more of me, you can find me at the DTD_podcast at Instagram. You can find me on YouTube at the DTD Podcast, and you can also find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast. Now, don't forget, DTDpodcast.net is kind of the one-stop shop. You got the audio version, the video version. You'll get to see pictures of Vance. You'll get to take a look at the machine that he's talking about, and you'll get to look at a lot of different things and get a really closer look at Vance and everything that he's talked about on this show. Also, don't forget, go to our sponsor, Police Coffee, at policecoffee.com. It's an officer-owned business dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends and shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant, and their specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor is concerned. Their coffee is some of the best you'll find out there, but it also serves an important cause. It gives back to our community. 50% of the profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. Do not forget to go to them, policecoffee.com, and when you do and you put your order in, if you put DJK10, you get 10% off your order. Well, Vance, thank you for stopping by so much. Your story is an amazing one. I hope that a lot of people come and check this out. And as for police departments and first responders all over the United States, that's going to be it, guys. That's Vance. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.